All right, it's time for a little bit more fun. Our second panel is seated. It's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this panel, Mr. Joel Heitkamp, host of KFGO's News and Views. Joel.
Thank you. Appreciate it, and I appreciate the opportunity. Is that what they mean by face for radio? TV guys are always so tall and handsome. You know, we just get the radio job. I get the luxury of getting a chance to speak with four of our strongest leaders in the legislature. In fact, these four have been elected by their peers to be their leaders. Let me introduce them to you. Senator Rich Wardner, the Majority Leader of the North Dakota Senate. Representative Kent Nonstad, the Minority Leader of the North Dakota House. Representative Al Carlson, the Majority Leader of the North Dakota House. You brought your grandkids, huh? No, I got 5 grandkids. And Senator Joan Heckeman, the Assistant Minority Leader in the North Dakota Senate. We're going to begin with opening statements because really what we're going to focus on today is we're going to focus on something that you all know about, the Legacy Fund. North Dakota itself, the people of North Dakota itself said, you know what, with all these additional revenues coming in, we're going to sock some away. We're going to put it away. We're going to put it away till 2017, and then after that, we'll debate what we're going to do with the money, the principal, the interest, everything else. That's what we're going to discuss today. And so to begin that discussion, first off, I want to give each one of these individuals a chance for an opening statement. And I'm going to begin with Senator Wardner. Senator?
Thank you, Joel, and we appreciate being here to talk about the Legacy Fund. I think the Legacy Fund is probably a very important piece of tool that we have as we move forward in the state of North Dakota. It was a constitutional fund. Currently, it has about $3.4 billion in it, but really, when you take a look at that, it's not going to generate the kind of money that we're probably going to need in the future. My feelings is that we leave the principal alone and let the extraction tax, which puts in, and the production tax, both taxes, put in 30% of all our oil revenue goes into that, and let it continue to grow. And if we do anything when we can, we would use the earnings. And we have to take that biennium and take a look at it. But we want to get it high enough, the amount, the principal, the core fund, high enough so that it generates money that we can do things with. And then we fund priorities. And when I talk about priorities, I will give you quickly what would be a priority of mine today, and that would be dealing with behavioral health, which would be mental health counseling and alcohol counseling. That we need to deal with that. And you might say, well, why is that number one priority? Because we are filling our prisons up with people that have these conditions. And ladies and gentlemen, our prison is full. They're full. And we need to find ways to treat these people that are not violent offenders and make sure that we get it. That would be one. Education, infrastructure, and also tax relief would be examples of priorities. But I want to make this point, Joel, and that is simply this, that priorities change, and legislators in the future, using the earnings, might use it for a different set of priorities.
Representative Onstead.
Well, thank you, Joel, and thank you to the Chamber for having us the opportunity to discuss this. We're all in agreement that the Legacy Fund is being funded by a finite resource. It's a resource that eventually will come to an end, and so it only is proper, it only makes sense that those some of those dollars are set aside. It's really set aside for the future of North Dakota at that point. And there will come a time that we're kind of using some of those revenues coming now to fund certain projects and so on. I don't think we want to take those earnings and start replacing that at this point. We have our current revenue source, we have a current funding of projects that we have in place right now, and I think we're doing those adequate at that point, and so let's let that grow. But as we move forward, when we talk about the future of North Dakota, we want to make sure that it's an innovative ideas or those dollars are going to help diversify our economy further, to help those projects. Anytime you talk about the future, you talk about education, and education is our future. So as the senator said earlier, that should be a priority at this point, but we wanted to let that fund grow. We don't want to touch that principal. It would have to be an extreme case to have that. But when we look at across the state of North Dakota, let's assure that, like flood protection, for example, all the communities have that kind of flood protection. I mean, those would be ideas that's going to help grow your community at that point. Water projects, anywhere we're at that point. But it's important that there will be a time down the road that we're going to have to replace some of those revenues. Once that resource is starting to be depleted at that point, I hope it's going to be 40 years from now, but we don't know at that point. That'll be a time to maintain at that point and let those things grow. But right now, we have to look at making unique investments into the state of North Dakota, and that would be to use only a small portion of those earnings.
Representative Carlson.
Well, thank you, Joel, and thanks for having us here today. First of all, I'll give a little simple explanation of what it did. The legislature put this on the ballot, and it said that 30% of both taxes would go into the legacy fund. And obviously, there's a 7-year time frame after that's passed by the people that you cannot touch or alter it. So that 7-year time frame is coming to an end, and there's people drooling all over this fund. As you mentioned, sometimes all this money we knothole around the state. But this is a generational fund. This isn't meant for you and I. This is meant for our kids and our grandkids. And there's $3.28 billion in there today. We're putting in $44 million a month. And we anticipate by the end of 17, when we come back, or in July of 17, which will be the end of our next budget cycle, there'd be $4.3 billion in the fund. Now, to get that money out of there, it was very smart the way it was put in there. It takes 2/3 of the members elected to each house, and not more than 15% of the principal may be expended during a biennium. Now, this isn't the only money the state has. This is a reserve fund that we set aside for the future. So when we look to how do you spend the money, I'd be one saying, unless we absolutely need it, you shouldn't touch it, because we have all sorts of other revenue. There's another 70% of those taxes that get distributed to political subdivisions, to cities, to counties, to the state to spend, as well as sales tax, income tax, and all those things. So I'm on the side of the issue that there might be a lot of great ideas, but it will increase spending in some areas where we could afford it with our general government revenues without digging into the legacy fund. So I'm anxious to hear the questions, how people think about that, because I think the smart thing the people did the right thing. They set the money aside.
Senator Heckerman.
Well, thank you, Joel, and thanks to the Chamber for allowing us to be here today and present a little information on the Legacy Fund and what our dreams are about it for the next session. I think that when I think about the Legacy Fund, I think of 2 words, opportunity and responsibility. We have a great opportunity here as legislators to bring forward some positive impacts through the funds that have been deposited in the Legacy Fund. And I'm agreeable with the other panel members here, like, let's leave the principal alone as long as we can. It's there in the future when the oil funding and the money runs out. And right now, I think we will have enough funding in the 2017 session. When I look at responsibility, though, I go back to the 2015 session, and a bipartisan bill that was put in was to develop, a legacy foundation, and that was defeated. And I think that that's something that we certainly need to look at as a committee or foundation that brings forward some recommendations on how to use some of that principal and interest if people vote to use the principal in a positive manner for the state. And so when I look forward to that, I look to see how can we be good stewards as legislators. I don't want 141 of us coming in to the 2017 session and doing the monster mash and all of us throwing in bills and hoping some of them survive to be able to use some of that interest. That's not the way that we can be responsible with that. I think also we need to plan effectively. We need to start planning now, and that foundation would have been a good vehicle to use over the interim to prepare for the 2017 session. So we have a lot of opportunity, but we also have a lot of responsibility.
A number of questions are coming in, and of course you're part of this as well. Send your text to 22333, text GNDC space, and then your question or tweet #ND Summit, and those will come to us. And there's one question that is coming to us consistently, and I'm going to direct this to Representative Carlson, because he's the one of the 4 that said he wouldn't touch any of it if it was up to him. And that question is, how much principal is enough? How much is enough principal? How much, when do you have enough in the fund?
You know, I answered that question one time to you, and it was on the news for 2 weeks when we tried, and we tried to lower the oil tax. And I said we're going to raise $8 billion. When is enough enough? When's enough enough? I think that the smart thing to do is to put that money aside. If the day comes, Representative Onsted's right, there could be a day come when you need it, but the day is not today. So to rush with all these ideas to increase the size of government spending is just not something I'm in tune
But
with.
that doesn't answer the question. The question is, when is enough principal? How much is enough principal? What dollar amount? Do you have a dollar amount in mind?
There is no dollar amount because the law, unless they change the Constitution, it specifically says 30% of the tax, and it specifically says that you can only appropriate 15% of it in any given biennium. So the people would have to change it. The legislature can't.
No, I understand that, Al. That isn't my point. My point is, in your mind, because you're not going to pull out of it, when do you think there'll be enough in it that you can say, wait a second, now, obviously, we can put some of this to work?
Well, when you put it, but you're not looking at the other side of the equation. If that fund continues to grow exponentially, it means that we've raised way more of this other 70% that we have to spend of the regular general fund money.
Okay. There's another question that's coming our way, and that's been addressed by two individuals as we talked a little bit in the hallway. Senator Wardner, you mentioned that our prison is full. Senator Heckerman, you said to me earlier, you said we've got real serious issues when it comes to mental health. One of our techs come into us and say, the schools need mental health support too. Is that part of the education plan? I'm going to go with you first, Joan, on that.
Well, Joel, I'm not sure right now for the upcoming biennium how much money was put into mental health for the schools specifically. I do know we've worked on a suicide prevention plan that I've been an active part in the schools, and that's been very well received. While some people think it's one more thing the schools need to do, the schools are in contact with the students on a constant basis. And I understand this issue as being a lifelong educator. We teachers on a daily basis probably see your kids in a different light and hear more of their issues than they're willing to let their parents know on any given day. So I agree that more money needs to go to that. But mental health across the state of North Dakota and behavioral health was not addressed adequately in the last session, in the 2015 session. So schools, community health providers, rural North Dakota, you know, most of the people live in a few square miles in our state, and most of the square miles in our state have a few people in it. And all of those people need mental health services. If I have people that need to drive 100 miles when they're feeling suicidal or can't reach somebody or don't know where to go to, that's not right in the state of North Dakota when we are able to meet those needs. So that's one of the priorities, is getting mental health out there, and schools do need it too.
Senator Wardner, you gave me a dollar amount, and you talked about how much is in the fund, give or take. No one's going to be able to put their finger on the exact amount. But do you have an understanding of how much interest is going to be available to you in 2017? Just the interest.
Well, I did check that out, and I'm looking at a 5% return. We do have it invested now. We used to have it just in the Bank of North Dakota, but we do have it invested, and we are working at getting it invested so we get more and more of a return. But at a 5% return, I'm guessing that we'd maybe get around 180 to 200 million. And really, that's a lot of money, but in the big picture of things, there's a lot of needs out there, and that wouldn't, we need to build the fund more so our revenue is more.
I'm going to direct this question to Representative Onstad, because you live in the heart and soul of where this money's coming from. I mean, that's just the flat out truth. This money's coming from the oil patch, and it did come from the oil patch, and many of us here on this stage remember leaving Bismarck with a $13 million ending fund balance, crossing our fingers and hoping. And yet we're sitting here today talking about the numbers that Senator Wardner just threw out. How does the patch itself, the Williston Basin, those oil-producing counties feel about this, Representative Onstad?
That's a great question, and the fact is that 80% of that legacy fund is basically coming from 4 counties. And part of my district, I represent 3 of those 4 counties, or a portion of them at that point. they have a direct idea that they should be a priority for those dollars, and they have that point. And that's, so the concentration of the dollars where it's coming from is really from basically 4 counties at that point. Will it change? Hopefully it will, as that moves forward. So they have a priority where they want to be that, and they would say, come back and assist us, infrastructure, schools, healthcare, our social problems with crime in other entities. That's what they would be at that point. I think it's important that we not, because of, if it comes up to just the legislature to dictate dollars whenever that happens, whether it's just the earnings or the principal, I think we need to separate that out. I think it needs to be an independent group, typical of the Legacy Initiative and that group that funded that, because I see it becoming east against west, urban against rural, and we don't want that consideration, because this is set aside for the future of all the state of North Dakota.
Okay.
And I think it's important.
Representative Carlson, you answer that.
Well, I agree. The last part's really important. This isn't an east-west divide. It's a proper management of the resource dollars that you collect from it. And I think we need to be very cautious, but you also need to remember in last session, and don't like to dig up a lot of old skeletons if I don't have to, but last session we spent a lot of time talking about the distribution formula. You know, going from 75-25 to 70-30, and it was the oil-producing counties that wanted it 60-40 the other way. We made a step towards that, and I think that's a work in progress where you constantly look at the distribution of the money back to those counties and political subdivisions that it comes from. But at the same time, keeping in mind that it's a natural resource that's owned by the state, and that natural resource has some obligations to pay for encumbrances of the state. So it's a balancing act. It's always a tough issue, but it should not be east or west. It shouldn't be about you get your water or you don't get your water. I get my road, you don't get your road. It shouldn't end up being that way.
This question hasn't come yet, and I know you're going to want it asked. By the way, you can text questions to 22333. Just text GNDC space and then your question, or tweet #ND Summit, and we'll get it that way. But there's conservatives here, there's progressives here, whatever you want to label yourself, go ahead. That's your business. It shows up in how you vote. But I would argue this, and I'm curious to get you guys' take on this. We haven't exactly reined in state spending, right? Can we admit that? I mean, the budget that I left when I left the legislature in 2008 is pretty small compared to the state budget right now. And so if you're going to make pledges and promises that you're not going to touch this funds when time gets low, it begs the question, what are you going to cut? Because if you don't go into the legacy fund someday down the road to keep up what you've already started, you're going to find yourself in a position where you're going to have to look at some things and say, wait a second, you locals are going to have to pick up more on the property tax side. And I'm curious what your response to that is, and I'm going to start with the majority leader in the Senate.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question. That's on our mind all the time. And we talk about ongoing spending. But when we have record revenues coming in, what we've been doing is sending it out, Joel, as one-time funding. The surge money, $1.1 billion, went out as one-time funding. If we can't raise that kind of revenue next biennium, we don't have an obligation. And I would like to point out that that money not only went to the west, but there was some money that went to the east. The non-oil counties got money out of that. So we're not provincial out in the west. We want to make sure that everybody in the state grows with this windfall that we have. Ongoing spending, we watch it very carefully. And you're right, we got to be careful that the bar doesn't go too high. And that's why we watch it very, with an eagle eye almost, to make sure that our ongoing spending doesn't get too high. The thing you all need to understand.
Senator, I gotta interject there, because you say one-time funding, but it seems like one-time funding phase 1, one-time funding phase 2. There's some things that you guys have set up that I don't think you're going to have much choice to say, well, we promised you that amount, now you're going to have to deal with it yourself. And I want to get your take on that.
Well, I'm going to just take the surge, for example. We all knew that was one-time money. And I'm going to tell you that one of the things that we talk about is money that's coming back to the political subs. There is a formula for that. And by the way, just so everybody knows, the political subs formula is first, then the 30%. So we make sure we take care of them. We are studying that formula to hopefully to find a place where it belongs to take care of those political subs this biennium.
One of the questions comes in, and I'm going to phrase it a little bit differently, but they're talking about an independent group to look at these funds. You know, not all answers come from the legislature. You get, all politics is local. You look at what your people are saying. I'm going to go to you with this, Representative Onstead. Is there outside resources that you could look to other than government interest groups? You know what I'm getting at. They could say, wait a second, why don't you do this?
They currently had a legacy initiative fund, and I think there must have been 30 or 40 people that sat on that fund, and probably there's people right in the audience today that were part of that. And they met several times, a course of about 18 months, and they talked about responsibility, they talked about being accountable, transparent, and all those important things, but they also talked about use of those dollars. They never talked about getting into the original principle. They talked about taking a small portion of that, about 25%, and putting that into innovative ideas. And those innovative ideas are things that create diversification, and they're making an investment into the state of North Dakota and those ideas that can turn around and grow some things to that point. One of the problems we have is to create companion industries to the oil and gas industry. They've created a lot of things. Now let's turn around and let's expand off that. Let's job creation, so on, so we can diversify our economy but have companion industries with part of that. And I think this group, it's not totally, but get a wide representation, have them meet and come up with ideas. They come back and expound that to the legislature. The legislature is going to make the final decision. But if it's just to us, we're going to pinpoint our ideas basically back to our districts. And I think we need that wide opening from the state.
And that is the point, right?
That's correct.
If it becomes district-driven versus a state policy, which to me smells governor. You know, it goes to a branch that you folks don't like to see make that determination, but it'll show up in the budget. There was a great question here also that came in. It said, if we wait to use the fund, won't the fund become a reactionary fund than proactive fund? And I'm going to go to you first, Senator Heckman, on that.
Well, that's an interesting statement right there, and the fact that I think we actually budget wrong in the legislature. If we could have a 2-year span where we didn't have to spend any money, which you can't, that's hypothetical, we should only spend the money that we actually take in. Now, we do budgeting, but there is no surefire number at the end of that process, budgeting process, to know exactly whether we're going to get that amount of money in. And so looking at the legacy fund, it may be reactionary, but I think all of our budgeting is reactionary right now. We're reacting to what the needs are out there in the state of North Dakota, and we have to do that. We have to say, you know, how many more artichokes do you need to make a full plate in your area, in your business or your industry? And so we actually are reactionary right now. But we're also proactive right now, and I think the fund will continue to be that, in that we're looking down the road, and I think what Representative Onstead said, we need that foundation. We need that group of people, and you're not going to have everybody and every organization represented, but across the board group to provide some direction to the legislature.
I've got two for you, Representative Carlson. The first is more historical, and I think you're apt to answer this quite well for the people so they understand the Constitution in North Dakota. Why can't you give it back like Alaska?
Because we have a measure that says you cannot send dollars directly back to the citizens. And that's a constitutional change that would be required. I think it's a good one. You go to Alaska, I just met with a friend of mine, a speaker from Alaska, and they are absolutely flat broke. They've been sending checks back for years. They have very limits on the amount of oil they could produce up in their far north regions, and they have overspent, and they got a terrible problem. I can tell you, Joel, that going back to some of these other comments, it's much easier to govern when you're broke. You were there and I was there when we had a make-believe budget and we hoped we had a $5 million ending fund balance. And it was no question that you would say no to people because you didn't have the money.
Yeah.
But let me tell you, last session, no agency, every agency got an increase. So we're not talking about the legacy fund as being necessary. The general fund money we had, everybody got an increase. They just might not have got it, when they said they got to cut it, was just their increase wasn't as big as they wanted it to be. So we are raising plenty of general fund revenue. But to be reactionary, I think it's good to have a vision for what you would use the interest for on that money. But to add that and pile that on top of, and my conservative friends, I go home, they all give me heck. You guys spend money like drunken, and last time I said drunken sailors, I had all these Navy guys send notes in, so I can't say that.
Careful, the new chancellor of higher ed's a sailor.
Yeah, you
now,
gotta
so
look
better
out. Chancellor, no offense, by the way, on that. But the point,
I'm going to ask you an off-the-wall question, and I think it goes to what some of the folks are getting at in a roundabout way. Right now, you're no longer a legislator. You're a dictator. And I don't mean that as a joke. The democracy's gone. You have the money in your back pocket, and you get to do it for what you think is best for the state of North Dakota. But you got to do something with it. You know, what would you do? How would you spend the money? I'm going to go with you first, Ken.
I would set up, basically for our communities, a revolving loan fund, low interest rate, that they would have some skin in the game, and they'd have to pay that, some of that portion back, so it's a continuation at that point. It'd have to be viable, it'd have to be a way to pay that back at that point, where they could turn around and have those abilities, rather than sit on currently now on a priority list, and you're number 78, and there's a community that's number 12, this could create everybody on an equal playing field at that point in more of a revolving loan fund, and they could come back and get those dollars, and then they'd have to put that back for the next generation or whatever at that point.
Senator Wardner, I know you mentioned mental health and our prison's full, and you're spot on right. We got a problem, but that was your priority one, but I want you to give you a chance to answer the question as I directed it to you.
Well, I guess if I were the king and I had to handle this, I would let that fund grow so that I had money to do the things that I needed to do to fund the priorities. And as I gave them out, you know, the mental health and the alcohol abuse and drug abuse and things need to be treated because it's rotting away our society. And yes, schools would be a part of that. But I'm going to tell you that education and making sure that we have infrastructure. But ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about the Legacy Fund. We also have the Resources Trust Fund, which funds water projects. We also have the Common Schools Trust Fund, which is really a small legacy fund for education. $206 million it generated for K through 12 funding for this coming biennium. And it's getting more and more all the time, and that's what I want to see for that legacy fund. Leave the principal alone, use the earnings, and hopefully, and when you say what amount is enough? Well, Alaska has 45 billion. We got to at least have 45, 50 billion in it to be able to take care of the needs.
Representative Carlson, you're king of the world. What do you do with the money?
well, I'd leave it in the fund for now. I wouldn't take it out. I would, I believe, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to beat this horse half to death, but we have plenty of money revenue from other sources coming into the state today. And to expand government by saying we've got to have some more priorities out there, maybe we should reprioritize what we're already spending on and make sure that our budget, which has grown 20, 30, 40% over the bienniums, that we should be looking at how we do government better. So I'd leave it in the fund. I don't think that I would take it out. I want to just make a comment. Representative Onstead talked about having a revolving loan fund. We set up $200 million this last biennium in a revolving infrastructure loan program for these small cities and counties, townships, that they can borrow the money and pay it back and be able to put in some infrastructure, whereas they don't have the tax base normally to do it. So it's a good idea to have that revolving infrastructure loan fund. Instead of entitlements, have these people with a very low interest rate pay some of this money back. But for now, Joel, I wouldn't take that money out of there.
Senator Heckerman?
Well, I'm really pleased to hear Representative Carlson say we have plenty of money, because during last session, when we would go and ask House appropriations, we would hear the comment, we're out of money, there's no money in this fund, there's no money in that fund. So thank you, Representative Carlson, for assuring me there'll be plenty of money.
You must have been talking to senators when you talked.
I go back to one of the people that I think highly of, and that was Kent Conrad, and his first priorities were education, education, and education. And that's one of my priorities too, and I think that involves K through 12. It involves PK now. I'm a big advocate of pre-K, and I'm a big advocate of providing the doctorate and master's programs across our state. I'm also a big advocate of workforce development. Train ND didn't get enough money this year. And then looking at the health and safety issues. Our firemen and our volunteers across the state, EMS people, we're losing them in our rural areas. Maybe those of you that live in bigger towns don't have that issue, but it's a real issue in our smaller areas, and we need to develop that in order to keep our young people back in our rural areas.
Representative Carlson, the most fun days I have on talk radio are when we get on and spar. And people always wonder why we're friends. It's because I think we do it in the way it's supposed to be. You got an opinion, I got an opinion. You're a free market guy, right? If the free market works and you don't have the employees for the free market, then you're supposed to do what? You're supposed to pay them more. So you attract them, right? We're talking about taking people out of not their own profession and putting them in classrooms now because we don't have teachers. So we're talking, and a lot of questions are coming in about specifics about education. Is the free market working in North Dakota when it comes to education?
Well, I think it's working very well, and I think the support of the state that is given to state in education has gone from 52% to over 80%, paying for the cost of education for the local political subdivisions, those schools. And it's always been a priority. Higher education spending is at an all-time high. The most per capita spending of any state in the nation is higher education in North Dakota. So we value that within our existing budget. I have trouble with, there's been some proposals that everybody should get X amount of dollars to go to college, free out of the legacy fund. You know what? When you have to pay something back, I think you have more appreciation.
But that isn't my point. I'm sitting on a panel with 4 people that your home area said, we want you to be our leader. And every one of you have an education background.
Yep.
Every one of you 4 at one time or another has been in front of a classroom. We don't have teachers that want to be teachers anymore. So it begs this question. Is it because the job sucks? Or is it because you're not paying them enough? It's got to be one of the two. And that's what I'm asking. And Rich, I'll go to you. I mean, this has got to be a major concern of yours. You don't have the teachers to be in the classroom. Are we just not paying them enough? Are the local school boards not paying enough? Is this something the legacy fund could be used for? I don't know. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, I think that there are some school districts where they have a hard time getting the revenues to pay their teachers because the smaller schools have a lot of regulations and a lot of demands that that have been put on them. I think we need to take a look at how efficiently we roll out education. I think we got to do more interactive video to some of the small schools so we make sure that they're getting the classes they need. I think we need to take a look at efficiencies. However, yeah, I think maybe some more money is needed, but just throwing money at it isn't going to solve all the issues. So I do think we have some issues in education and we can do a better job with it.
But my point in this is that this is something that came before all of this. We didn't have the money. It goes back to what you were getting at earlier. The money wasn't there to fund it. You saw property taxes go up. You saw our dedication go down. We can use percentages now. We can use percentages that show that you're paying 70% or 70 cents on the dollar. Amen. Good. Way to go. Because that gets my property taxes down. I got some property tax relief. The point I'm trying to get at is, are we spending enough on the other end to keep teachers in the classroom? And Representative Onstead, I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I left education because of pay. I had a young family and I look at it seriously. After 10, 11 years being in there, I had $2,000 more than that initial teacher starting. And I looked at another comparison, another profession, and at that point, they had a double that person coming in there. And so if you want to look at it as a profession, you have to ask yourself, if I'm going to go to 4 or 5 years of school, I'm a good student, and my communication skills are great, I'm going to look at the dollars at that point. And you're going to look at, well, I could just well take that job. Why would I go into teaching and make that much less at that point? And so salary is a huge consideration why people are either in that profession or not. And it has changed over the years. We as a state, we expect more things to be more curriculum classes. We expect more things to come out of that school district and so on. And a lot of people says, I don't need that because I can go take something that's less pressure and make more money. And it is about money, and that's, you can't say anything different.
Representative Carlson, you got that look. You want to address that?
Well, I'm just reading some of the questions
We're not
here.
buying the Vikings.
Yeah, they want us to buy the Vikings. Somebody does. You know, several years back, we decided that we were going to set a minimum, when we were going to put more money in education, we were going to set a minimum salary for teachers. We can't stand it when the federal government sends a mandate down on education to us. But yet, we as a state said we're going to make sure that every school pays a minimum. That's a local decision. We're sending back 80% of the cost of that student. Those local subdivisions have to make that decision whether they're going to set a salary base to keep those teachers. That should stay local. That shouldn't stay with the state. And I think that is a business we don't need to be in.
Okay, the people here are entrepreneurs. They're business people. I get that. And you guys have been talking about everything from mental health to prisons to infrastructure to roads to schools. All those are the meat and potatoes that you got to deal with. But they're right. At a time of wealth, it's a good problem to have, right? What are we not looking at that we've always put on the what if we just could list? What if we just could take that chance or try this, when it comes to tourism, when it comes to drawing people from outside our state to say, you know what, look at what North Dakota's doing instead of us looking at what they're doing. Does anybody I'm not going to pick out any one individual. Raise your hand. Does anybody have something completely off the wall that you think, you know what, let's take a chance on this? Anyone? Joan?
Well, I don't know about taking a chance on a business or not, but we've had several young people in our community, in my district as a whole, go out and try the big world. They've gone out and got training, and they've gone to Minneapolis, they've gone to Chicago, they've gone to Denver. We have a number of them coming back to our communities to raise their families. And they'd rather even raise their families, sorry about this, Fargo, Bismarck, and Minot, in our small communities, because they can let their kids go ride bike up and down the street. They know that they have good teachers, although we're struggling in that issue. But, you know, we have to promote our peaceful life here in North Dakota. We've got the good life here. And I think that that's some opportunities for business to come in and make developments. There are issues. There's issues in every state and every town. But we've got a lot of young people coming back to our community, and we're very thankful for that.
The spirit of the question is really this. I refereed Bison football games when, no offense to Bob Babich, there wasn't 8,000 people at these games, right? You build a Fargo Dome, and you build it for 18,000, 19,000 people, and it's full every weekend, and people are arguing about who's going to get the tickets now, right? I mean, is there something like that out there? This area that we're in right now has become a metro center. Bismarck surpassed Grand Forks like it was standing still, population-wise. Should we be looking, or are these local issues that they should be coming to you with? But is there an idea that people have come to you and said, we got to build this thing because it'll work? Representative Carlson?
Well, there's always a way to spend money. Everybody's got a good idea on spending money. I think you have to understand what the role of government. What is the role of the state government? You know, we have certain things we have health and human services issues to take care of, incarceration, education, public safety. Those are state responsibilities, and we've expanded way beyond all those. So we need to prioritize. Joel, I think that a lot of these things go back to the local communities. The more local involvement in those decisions, the better it is.
I'm going to ask this question. I know I'm going to get some of you mad at me, but when you have the extra dollars, sometimes you start saying, like you did, Representative Carlson, we made good news out of that for some days. When's enough, right? And pretty soon you're having debates about tax breaks for oil companies. I mean, we did. We had that. It happened. Senator Wardner, you went out there and you made the pitch and you made the plea. Is that where we're going to end up? You know, where to the point with the legacy fund where, oh my God, look at how much money we got. We don't even need to tax anybody anymore. We'll just give every corporation a break. We'll give, and Senator Wardner, I'll throw that to you first.
Well, I don't know. I don't think we're ever going to completely get rid of our income taxes. I just want to remind everybody, property tax is a local tax. The state is helping out wherever they can. And a lot of people make it sound like it's really a responsibility of the state. But as far as our economy, there's no question education is number one. We got to do a better job there. And yes, we have to infuse some dollars to do a better job. We want a skilled workforce coming out of there to take care of the needs in the economy. But we also need to keep taxes down so companies want to come here and provide jobs. Joel, you remember back when everybody's leaving the state? Everybody was leaving the state. Now we got some jobs. We got people building companies so that we have jobs for our young people, and they're staying here. Many have come home because there's jobs. So it's kind of a balancing act, education, the economy, and part of the economy is making sure you have a tax rate that is not onerous, and yet you've got to fund education.
You know that I was going to sneak higher education into this, and that's one of the questions that's coming up in terms of our workforce. Are we doing the right job with the money that you're giving higher ed for the next workforce? It's a fair question. I'm going to go with you first, Representative Onstead.
We look at the workforce and everybody has a shortage of workers. And I think their basic agreement is about salary, you know, getting those in there. But then when you come back to higher ed and turn on, I don't think higher ed can move fast enough is because today we need plumbers and tomorrow we need teachers. We're not moving fast enough to get to direct those dollars in there. We need teachers. It doesn't mean we lower the standards for those teachers, but we got to move faster, and that takes a collaboration of both K through 12 and the college level to work and direct that out and turn out the best product that we need for that at that point. So,
Representative Carlson, your answer to that.
Well, there's no question that I think that we need to change the face of higher education and how it delivers its services in the state. Especially, I'm a trades guy, I'm a contractor. And if you want to hire a plumber, you got to go to Moorhead. If you want to hire a carpenter, you got to go to Moorhead or Thief River Tech. We need to get a system. If we have, in fact, a system, we should have one system of all of our trade and tech schools, our community colleges, where we are absolutely targeting what businesses want. Bring all the business guys in the room and say, what do you need? And then start training them tomorrow. And we don't do that, and we don't do a very good job of it. And I know Dr. Hagerrod is here. He's got a clean slate to work with me. And we need to be reactionary, like he said, and provide the jobs that are out there that people need. And we need a system that provides that for us.
I want everybody to get a chance to answer that one. Senator Heckman.
Well, I think the money that we provided for higher education went to probably more of the four-year colleges and the two-year colleges. And the two-year schools have done a good job of stepping up to the plate and developing the programs that are needed, whether, you know, in my area it's the police training, and we get precision ag now at Lake Region. But the needs are more than what we're providing the money for those careers and tech programs right now, so we need to focus on those. On the other hand, when we talk about education as a whole, even high school education, there's more opportunities for high school students to take classes online too at distance education. So when we look at the education overall, it's going to be a big part of our budget for the state of North Dakota because it's a big part of our need in the state of North Dakota, and we need to continue to fund it adequately.
Some comments come to you. It says, keep in mind the legacy fund is only $6,000 per person, not much of a tax break. Better do something special with it. It's an interesting point. Senator Wardner, you provide a very unique perspective having worked in higher ed. I want you to answer my question on higher education.
Well, I think when it comes to higher education, I think Well, teachers, we need to get more teachers educated because we've got a shortfall. But one of the other areas is we need to put more into the skills training and the technology and more emphasis on that.
Okay, 1 minute, 1 minute only. I'm an old football ref too, Al. I know. We're going to go the opposite way here. Senator Heckman, closing comments.
Well, I think the Legacy Fund, like I said, is a great opportunity with a great responsibility. We've had a leading group of people come in with recommendations. I think we need to continue with that group of people and come with some focus to the next legislative session, because we have other priorities in the legislative session rather than spending just the Legacy Fund money. We have many budgets that need to be taken care of and other issues that 80 days goes quite fast. And so opportunity, responsibility, and making this foundation available to do their work before the session starts.
Representative Carlson.
Well, I'll go back to the same basic comments. In the last session, we raised every budget. We sent $1 billion back in tax relief to the citizens, and we left money there with an ending fund balance of a couple $100 million and a stabilization fund of $600 million. If we have to do more spending, then we should reprioritize the massive increases we've had in the last few bienniums and reprioritize that and get that job done, because the money is there without attacking that fund at this point in time.
Representative Onstead.
We need to make an investment in whether it's infrastructure, whatever. They come to the table because there's definite needs all the way across the state of North Dakota. They've been identified, and we're just making a partial payment towards that. We need to make that investment to move this thing forward. Otherwise, places are going to stall. And right now, we're stalling in rural North Dakota because we don't have enough water in rural North Dakota. We don't have enough health care, accessible health care in rural North Dakota. The schools are the last in line where the teachers are going to go. They just as soon be somewhere else because you don't have enough amenities at that point. Those are needs that need to be addressed, and we can't sit and wait. Now, we have an opportunity now. Because of the Legacy Fund, we have an opportunity now to look at that and strategize how we want it. Whether you use the money today or tomorrow, we need to now sit down and how we plan to use those dollars.
Senator Wardner.
Well, I would like to, I see the question on there that says, Wardner, if the state isn't responsible for property taxes, then why are we involved in the assessors? Well, first of all, I'm glad you asked that, and a lot of this all comes down to property tax. Number one, property taxes and equalization is in the Constitution of the state of North Dakota. And it says that all classes of property need to be equalized, which we have not done, that we're finally getting it done. And we want people to do it the same. And you might say, well, who cares? Well, it's all about the school funding formula. Because rich districts get less from the state, poor districts get more. Making sure that the same number of dollars are behind every child in the state of North Dakota. So that's why we're involved, and we want to make sure that everybody's doing it the same.
Senator Heckman, I'm going to let you double dip.
Great. I just had one more comment, Joel. I think as the chamber people sitting out here today, when you talk about business and industry across the state of North Dakota, one thing that none of us mentioned today is childcare. And in my district, childcare is a huge issue. When I have a parent driving 28 miles one way to drop off their child at childcare and then driving back 28 miles to do their job in their community. And in western North Dakota, I know of a family right now that has 2 children, and they got an increase. They're paying $1,600 a month for childcare alone. And so something needs to be done in that area. We need to continue to work with that, because if we don't have good childcare, you aren't going to have your businesses have workers.
There's a panel on higher education coming up. A number of these questions coming in on higher ed will get addressed. Tenure, some of the other things. There was one consistent theme that came at you with the questioning, and that was quality of life. And I'm going to speak from a perspective of a dad. I've got a daughter with 2 kids and her husband, and they love South Fargo because they got bike paths. They've got access to the shields. Those things matter. And so I guess if there's one theme that has come at you in the form of questions, it's about quality of life, which Representative Onstead, I'm sure, plays into your let these small towns borrow a couple bucks so they can compete for that. And I think that's a wonderful point, and I didn't want the audience to think that we were ignoring it. Before Tom gets up here and gives you your poll, I want to get a big round of applause for our panel. I think they did a fabulous job. I'm going to yield the podium to Tom.
All right, thanks, Joel. Interesting discussion. A lot of great questions. Thanks to the panelists again. Okay, time for our poll. If you were king for the day, how would you spend the first distribution of legacy fund earnings? And text GNDC 8 for statewide scholarship program. Reinvest, we don't need the money right now. That's GNDC 9. Lower or eliminate our income taxes, GNDC 10. Just let the earning flow for use in general government, that's GNDC 11. And the old don't know, don't care, GNDC 12. And we'll take a look here and watch those numbers flow in as you text in to 22333. Are you done with that? Hold on one second, we're going to keep you here for a second. We're going to keep them in the spotlight just for another minute. And while we watch the numbers move, it's lunchtime. Good news there. Again, to your left at the table, as you just come into the room, you can find water, soda, and coffee. What we're going to do for lunch is there's a buffet-style line just out in the lobby. To your left, I'm told there's chicken and biscuits and mashed potatoes, so you're going to be able to go through, pick out what you want. They're going to turn up the lights in here for a while as we eat lunch, so come back in here for lunch, and then we'll get back into our afternoon session. So it looks like 67% are saying right now, reinvest. We don't need the money right now. Enjoy your lunch. We'll see you back here in just a few minutes.